Good afternoon. Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me? Is it good? Okay, cool. All right, so I'm excited to be here. This is a project that I've been mulling over for the past year or so, and like how to approach this particular focus. And so this is just sort of a basic framework, and I would really welcome any feedback that any of you have. So let's rock and roll. Let's do this. So the title of my presentation today is Coming Out Narratives, Examining Disaffiliating Mormon Women's Stories. And it does differ slightly from what's in your program because I slightly changed. But, okay. Anyway, through the lens of lesbian gay identity formation. So what I am doing is, a number of years ago, about 2.5 years ago, I embarked on a research project where I interviewed 20 women who were members of a secret Facebook group for disaffiliating, doubting, and formerly Mormon women about their faith transition experiences. So my overall research project, from which I'm drawing my data for this presentation, comes from that project. So I primarily undertook this project because I was really interested in the particular group that the women were members of, because I think that researcher identity can add a lot to a project. I'll say that I'm also a member of this group, and so I was curious about the way that this group was providing support for its members in their disaffiliation and questioning process. When I was studying and thinking about the identity formation of these women, I started delving into the identity formation literature in sociology, which is my field, and social psychology. And there's been a number of sort of focuses over the years on how identities are formed and what the self is. And really the crux of the issue is that we are not one self, but we are many selves. And we come at these selves depending on how committed we are to a certain identity. Our identities are organized on a hierarchy depending on how committed and how salient that those identities are. So for instance, if we feel that the identity is really important to in a certain scenario, then we will invoke that identity and we will behave as that type of self. Let's go back, sorry. I need to get rid of a thing here. Okay. And this identity theory work comes out of the symbolic interactionist tradition, and talks about how our selves are developed in a social process. So, I apologize, I lost my train here. So we have our identity development. We have the selves that are organized on a hierarchy. And then I started looking into the coming out literature for LGBTQ individuals, because many of the stories that I was hearing from the women in this project mirrored the stories that I had heard from individuals who came out as gay or lesbian or transgendered. And there are a number of models that are put out there to describe this identity development, and they kind of fall under several paradigms: nature versus nurture, biology versus environment, essentialism versus social constructionism. And I was really drawn to Coleman's 1982 5-stage model of gay and lesbian identity development because it's a nonlinear model. So individuals may be at different places pursuing different tasks depending on what type of their identity they're developing. And it gave but at the same time it gives a sort of a really nice comprehensive example of how one goes from one identity to another in a sometimes trying situation. So there is a precedence in the sociology of religion for using stage models for identity development, especially in religion. Peake in 2005 used a 3-stage model to describe second-generation Muslim Americans' identity development. Her stages were ascribed identity, religion as chosen identity, and then religion as declared identity. And this model shows how those raised and socialized in a religion develop those identities, but not how those exiting from a high-demand religion construct new identities. In fact, there is not much out there in the literature that I am aware of about religious disaffiliation identity construction. So the specific research question that I was looking at for this project is, can stages of identity development among high-demand religious disaffiliates be explained by models used to describe lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender individuals' coming out process? The social environment in which an individual grows and develops makes a life, impacts their values and beliefs, and all of these things are subject to change if major changes occur internally within individual selves or externally in their environment, causing somebody to reevaluate their identities. And that comes from a project by Loveland, who looked at how disaffiliation affects identities or affects development. And so that's the social identity information that I'm sort of coming from. So I already a little while ago sort of introduced what my project was to explore the experience of doubting, disaffiliating, and formerly Mormon women in a secret Facebook support group. I wanted to look at the group organization, structure, and composition, and did 20 in-depth structured interviews that I did through convenience and snowball sampling. The group itself was made up of 200 women between the ages of 25 and mainly between the ages of 25 and 45, with some connection to Mormonism, either past or current. There were moderators in the group, but they rarely intervened. It was a pretty self-policing community. There's a little information about the demographics of the subjects. Because the group had a strong in-person component, most of the women that I interviewed were here along the Wasatch Front. Most were married. They were highly educated. 75% had at least a bachelor's degree. And keeping with the focus of the group as sort of an irreverent place, 100% of the women that I interviewed did say they no longer believed in a Judeo-Christian God. So the stage model that I'm using, Coleman's 5-stage model, the first stage that they have is called the pre-coming out. So for LGBT individuals, this is where they begin to feel there's something different about themselves, and they feel that others feel that too. So it's internal, but it's also social because they respond to cues in their environment. So the way that I framed this, as far as my project, was women would express feeling uneasy about certain parts of LDS church affiliation. The number one that people told me in these interviews was discomfort with the church's stance on LGBTQ issues, interestingly enough, and particularly Prop 8 in California, which these interviews were 2015, so Prop 8 had happened a few years before that. It was still fresh in people's minds. Another common one was women's place in the church, past and present racism in the church, and the particular Utah Mormon subculture that made them question whether this was a faith that really they felt a part of. So together, as well as separately, these contextual issues created identity confusion among my interviewees. And Loveland, who I referenced earlier, in 2003, did some work on religious switching in the rational choice paradigm that indicated that preferences are continual in our lives, continually shifting, and they are shaped by the social context. So stage 2 in this model is coming out to self as well as others. Individuals are not fully, in the gay and lesbian community, individuals are not fully out in their new identity, but they're comfortable with it themselves, and they are expressing it to close family and friends. This is where the group that these women belong to holds an important place, because it acts as a liminal space in many ways. And liminal spaces are like waiting areas between identities where transformation and personal growth can occur. And a secret Facebook group, which is one that can't be seen by others on the social media platform, is an area where people can experience that sort of identity transition. In fact, many of the interviewees said that the secret status of the group was very important in their decision to join the group. Stage 3 in the model is exploration. Coleman described this as a bit like adolescence, rebellious stage. For gay and lesbian individuals, it might be a time to experiment sexually, to experiment with drugs and alcohol. It's really just an experience of what this identity means. The women that I interviewed also talked about an exploration stage where they experimented with alcohol, with sexuality, with a new relationship with their body, what it meant to cover or uncover different parts of the body that were prescribed to them in their Mormon culture. And they talked a lot about authenticity and exploring what that meant for them in their new identities. Stage 4, and this is the one I'm a little unsure about, if I'm stretching a little to include this, so I would love any feedback, is Coleman describes it as the first relationship and visible coming out stage. So for gay and lesbian individuals, this would be the stage where they have their first committed relationship, their first visible romantic relationship, and they are more visibly out to their family, friends, and others in their community. Many of the women that I interviewed who were members of this group started out with these sort of weak-tied relationships, but then developed a number of strong-tied and close friendships with people who were also in a process of disaffiliating from the Mormon Church. And these relationships became really important to them as they developed their new identities outside of the Mormon faith. Moving beyond the superficial bonds and the relative anonymity of the group to a face-to-face, person-to-person relationship that was sort of predicated on this new identity. Interestingly, Coleman also includes a lack of empathy due to unstable identity in his model, and said that it might be difficult for gay and lesbian individuals during this stage to have fulfilling relationships because they still have a lot of anger about their coming out process. And a number of the women that I spoke to expressed anger during their transition, anger at the church or anger at family members, and it made them less empathetic, they thought, to those who were witnessing their transition. One woman in particular said that people told her she was hostile. Someone said to her, "Dude, you need to see a therapist," because of her anger at the faith that she was raised in. The 5th stage, and remember, these stages don't have to happen in a linear fashion. It's not you go from 1 to 2 to 3. People may be working on identity development tasks in multiple stages. And the 5th stage, Coleman describes this stage as a challenging stage to reach, and many don't ever fully integrate their public and private selves here. But for gay and lesbian individuals, this would be the stage where they are fully integrated with their identities in their life, and they're no longer trying to hide their new sexual identity from anyone. For those of the women who I interviewed, I likened this to being comfortable with their post-Mormon identity, and to the way that they engage with social media. So a couple of the questions on my interview schedule had to do with what types of topics do you post about on Facebook? And some individuals would say, I don't post about anything controversial. I stick to fuzzy bunnies and kitties and child pictures. And others would say, I post about feminism. I post about issues that I think affect the Mormon Church, and I post about gay and lesbian rights. So it's this comfort with the different parts of their identity that they're showing in the way that their social media presence looks. So in conclusion, Mormon identity, as I think a number of research studies have shown, is largely a cultural as well as a religious identity. So identity within a culture is socially constructed by the interactions with those members of your community. I found many parallels in identity development between the women in my interview selection and gay and lesbian individuals. And again, not a linear progress, not a linear process, but one that individuals work on, yet one that I think describes well the way that individuals exiting church may construct their new identities. Thank you.